Welcome back, everyone. Did everyone have a great lunch? I did. I could eat Indian food all day long. All right. So, can you please raise your hand if you're sitting next to someone you work with? Gentlemen, ladies. If you are sitting, this table needs to redistribute. So, can we have some swapping going on? Would you be willing to sit next to somebody you don't know? You don't work with them, but you know them. But these guys, do you know each other and work together? Would you like to maybe go to another table? And anyone else sitting next to someone they work with or know well? Nope. Okay. Sorry, we're going to... Awesome, thank you. Okay, so because of time limitations, what we'd like you to do is just take a couple minutes and please say hello to everyone at your table. Maybe we have, for the group work, it would probably be, this is quite a large table, so if anyone's willing to join this table over here, and then just introduce yourselves at your table if you don't mind, if you already haven't said hello. So that's task number 1. Thank you all for coming back on time. So we're just saying hello to our neighbors. Great. Okay, now wait. Now this table's too big. Okay, wait. Okay, we're good. We're good. You can stay there. Yeah. Please greet one another. Oh, you know, we could have, if you wouldn't mind, yes. Break it up. Yes, you may. I'm a little bit of a, there's a joke. My husband once went to Vietnam, and he met with a horoscope, somebody to tell him his horoscope. And they said, they were telling him all about his life, and then they said, is your wife a dictator? And he said, yes, she is. And then they said, but you should listen to her. So anyway. Okay, now that I've dictated where everyone's sitting, I hope you're not filming that part. Okay, all righty, so welcome back. We are going to do, okay, wait, you're still introducing yourselves, okay. Okay, if I can have you gentlemen, do you know each other? Then you have to separate. One of you can go to that table over there, the far one, and then the other can sit here or there or there. Just want to separate people that know each other. So I'm a social dictator. What? Yes. All right, I'm going to, I think you guys could spend all day talking to one another, but now we have to get going because we have a lot to do in a short amount of time. So, all right, we are going to start our, Chris. Okay, I knew his name, I could call him out. All right, here we go. So this afternoon, here's what we're going to do. Again, I'm afraid that we probably have more material than we have time. So what I'd like to do is, how many of you have actually noticed that in your packet you received a technical brief on economic evaluation for multisectoral nutrition strategies? Okay, please raise your hand if you have not seen that document. Will, do you have a copy of it? Okay, so what I'm talking about is in your folders, all of you should have received this technical working brief. You didn't memorize it yet? I'm just kidding. Okay, just kidding. All right, so today, honestly, after today's workshop, when you read this, it might read a little bit easier than yesterday if you read it, and it also notes everything that I'm presenting in the next 20 minutes, as well as resources for you, okay? So please remember to keep this as a resource. So let's talk about moving toward a common approach for evaluating economic evaluation for multisectoral nutrition strategies. Not those nutrition-specific interventions, although those may be part of a multisectoral approach, right? So what we care about now, what we want to think about is, what if I want to bring it all together in a particular community at a regional level or national level? How might I do it? I want to just step back and say, what's the rationale for a common approach? I hope I've convinced you by now that most of the research to date has been on nutrition specific, or those 13 interventions that are easy to measure their effectiveness and cost effectiveness, but that we recognize that we're now moving toward a food systems approach to address malnutrition, and including underweight and overweight, and we need to consider other sectors' roles in contributing and to improving in malnutrition. So we need better information on costs and benefits of multisectoral strategies. We also would like to, since it's limited, the evidence is limited, and we're really going to start generating it, let's generate it so it's more standard. So if we can influence the generation of information that's of high quality and sharing standard input categories, activity categories, metrics for measuring benefits, perhaps in the next 10 years, in 10 years when we look back, we're going to see a body of evidence that we can use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this fairly kind of organic approach for thinking about how to measure costs and benefits of multisectoral strategy. And this came about through our working group, trying to figure out how do we start to think about this. The first thing that we need to do is think about, we thought, a typology of interventions. Because what you'll often hear people saying is, oh gosh, multisectoral strategies are all so different. You can't possibly compare them. But actually, they are all very different, but they have a lot of very common elements. So how do we start to group multisectoral nutrition strategies so that they seem more similar than different? One way that we decided to do it was to build a typology around this. This is called a nutrition-sensitive value chain. It was developed by Aulo Gelli and DePena and James Garrett for the International Fund for Agricultural Development to try to make their investments more nutrition sensitive. So this is a very relevant framework for agriculture, all right? And what it's basically saying is that as you move, how do you start to increase the nutritional value as you move across the value chain, right? From inputs to our final preparation and consumption of nutrient-rich foods. So there's a series of activities that interventions that are aimed at increasing supply. There's a series aimed at increasing demand. There are interventions that enhance the nutrition value along this nutrition-sensitive value chain. And women's empowerment has to be addressed throughout, right? So paying attention to gender throughout. So we would say that there's there's two main typologies: interventions that increase supply, things that you can invest in production and processing, increase production of livestock, home gardens, improved processing of orange flesh sweet potato flour, storage and processing. Then there's a series of activities that increase demand, right? Promotion, behavior change, social marketing, and food preparation, and then consumption, right? So cooking classes or hygiene, recipe development. So if you bear with me, then you'll say, okay, there's this typology: increase supply, increase demand, add nutritional value, empower women. So what we did was we took this framework and we then, it's kind of complicated, the next thing we did was we looked at the Scaling Up Nutrition Compendium of Actions for Nutrition. How many people are familiar with this document? If not, it's a great document. It actually, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. It's called the SUN Compendium of Action for Nutrition, and we mapped all of their interventions to our typology and made it work more or less, okay? It's not perfect one-to-one, but we were able to slot most of these different types of interventions in food, agriculture, and healthy diets, in maternal and child care, in multisectoral nutrition governance, in health, and in social protection. We were able to map it broadly to our typology. So we have a typology of interventions. We recognize that there's many components in them, so the multisectoral aspect of it. Then we'd say, well, what if we use a program impact pathway? What if we start to put together those activities from, oops, sorry, oh gosh, sorry. So we then create a generic program impact pathway. And on the top, you can see our activities to enhance demand. And it's just an example. And these include things like social marketing, institutional feeding, behavior change. And then it's like, well, and we know that we often will then combine these with activities to increase production, poultry production, production of orange flesh sweet potato, home gardens, right? That's not untypical. Match an agricultural production activity with social behavior change, add some other components. Lately, people have been integrating water, sanitation, hygiene. There might be some mechanisms that, again, go to strengthening the nutrition value, enabling environment. And then what we do is a program impact pathway helps you to go from your activities to what are your, this should be proximal. We do have a little typo in the document. What are your proximal outcomes, your distal, and what's the impact you expect to see, all right? And these include the proximal changes in behavior that you want to observe. And the distal might be changes in diets, changes in healthy eating, changes in production. And these lead to improved health and nutrition or improved income, all right? So it's a program impact pathway, and we think that if you start to think about the activities and the resource use and the benefits along this program impact pathway, that can help us to think about the cost and consequences. Any questions on this? So we're pulling together a couple different frameworks. All right, so then the next thing, yes, please, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Her question was, how do you define proximal and distal? Typically, I would think of an activity, an intermediate outcome, right? So perhaps what you want to do is, let's say that you want to increase women's participation in health center because you want to improve her BMI. So I think a proximal indicator would be women's attendance at ANC clinics, perhaps. The distal might be an increase in BMI, and then perhaps if you were interested in birth outcomes or the child's nutritional status, that you know, it's complex. So exactly. You know, these words, these labels are confusing, but thank you. It's, yeah. And so for those of you interested, there are some nice papers on program impact pathways by Rahul Rawat. We can share those later if you're not familiar with this concept. Okay, so then what we want to do is we use, as I just mentioned, we use that program impact pathway to first identify the activities. So if you remember, if we think about the nutrition-sensitive value chain, and I mentioned there were interventions to increase production and processing, distribution, transportation, perhaps labeling or behavior change, you have these big, what we call activity buckets. And what we're going to suggest, what we're suggesting through the work we're doing, is to try to come up with some consistent and standard buckets, large, broad categories of inputs. This particular one is good for nutrition-sensitive value chain. We'll show you some others. And then what you start to do as an analyst, you're thinking, well, what's the production? This is the activity. What inputs do I need? It's not that difficult to kind of also think about, well, I need staff, I need personnel. For production, I need seeds. I need to distribute those seeds. I might need to increase access to credit. So you start to think about what are the inputs essential for that activity, and then how do those inputs translate into cost, What are the direct costs associated with delivering those seeds, with the program staff that's involved, with the transport per diem, meeting costs, right? And so the idea is that for each activity, you start to think about inputs and costs. And we're going to do an exercise on that today. So one is thinking about the activities, inputs, and costs using the same program impact pathway. And this is where it starts to get tricky. We start to think about what are the range of benefits associated with the multisectoral nutrition strategy. Why does it get tricky? Because here is not a complete list, but a near complete list of the types of benefits that result from the actions that we take. And many of us are interested in measuring anthropometry, stunting, wasting, or underweight, but the reality is we may also be interested in reducing micronutrient deficiency, but we also care very much about those intermediate outcomes related to food security, dietary diversity, women's empowerment. So what you can see from this is that some of these indicators are very easy to measure in terms of impact, in terms of measuring a change in health status and converting that either into a health benefit, like a death averted or disability averted, or into a cost. But there's some, there's some benefits that are indices. And honestly, we don't know how to put a dollar value to a food security indicator, or to women's empowerment, or vulnerability, right? So there's some here that don't translate well into a measurable health benefit, measurable nutrition benefit, or a measurable cost. So that's a big problem for us. So what are your options? One option is you can look at the cost of achieving that outcome. That's important, all right? So that's a cost and consequence. What was the cost in reducing household food security by 15% in my sample? That's okay, you can do that. What is the cost of reaching a beneficiary with this intervention? That's a cost outcome, but it's a cost efficiency indicator, cost per beneficiary, but it isn't cost effectiveness and it's not cost utility, all right? So we have to get creative about how can we improve presenting this information. So this is how we're proposing to do that. So again, thinking about that program impact pathway and mapping the activities, the inputs, and the costs to those very specific outcomes associated with those activities. All right, the next question is, yeah, but some activities contribute to multiple outcomes. Yep, they do. And that's where cost analysis becomes a bit challenging. You have to identify all the resources you've used and allocate the share to different types of outcomes, all right? And I'm not going to get into the detail of how to do that, but we're providing guidance for you on that. And I should mention there will be a methods document following this technical working brief, which will provide guidance on how to allocate shared program costs. So what are we really after with this document? What I mentioned to you when I started is like, well, you know, you'll hear people say, there's too many different types of multisectoral nutrition strategies. How can we standardize? Well, having worked in global health and worked in immunization and HIV and reproductive health, I can tell you that even within the field of HIV screening and treatment, there are hundreds of types of interventions to reach beneficiaries. It's as complex as this. So the trick is, can we get toward a standard unit cost? That's an important contribution. And so what we're saying is, it doesn't matter what your intervention is. I mean, it does. But if you can break it, if you can break it down, so you have your intervention, if you can break it down into direct activities, into service sector training, materials development, many of these standard activities that we observe in all kinds of interventions, if you can identify what are the shared program costs, that's a start to getting toward something standard and transparent. And then for each of those, you'd have to understand what is the input use and prices. Maybe you have financial data available, and you start from there, but you want to understand the quantities and prices associated with these various activities. And we believe that if you can break that down, you can arrive at a unit cost per beneficiary that means something to you and that is comparable across studies, as long as you follow best practices in presenting your work, which is describe your intervention well, tell us what the components of it are, and tell us how you did this. I would be able to look at a cost per beneficiary of a livestock nutrition program and compare it to a food-based one. That would be useful. So here's an example. It's like, can this really be done? It's like, yep, it really can be done. Here's an example of a school feeding program. The intervention typology is it had activities to increase the demand for food. It had activities to increase the supply for nutritious foods, and it had an enabling environment component. The project was linking mothers to the schools where their children go to preschool and giving them some inputs to grow more nutritious foods and teaching them how to cook more nutritious foods. And they were to bring lunch to the school once a month. Well, it turned out that this program was effective not only in improving child development scores in the preschools, it actually ended up having an effect of reducing stunting by like 11 or 12% in the homes of the mothers that were preparing the foods. So that's the project. And you can see what the intervention details are listed. The activities and the technologies used are listed. The there should be platform is listed. It was early childhood development, preschool center. That platform didn't change regardless of whether looking at supply or demand. And the population were mothers, caregivers, and their siblings at home, right? So you can articulate this in a diagram like this. And then, taking it a little further, we then start to derive standard units of cost, right? So what is the cost per nutrition training? What's that cost per extension agent whose skills were changed? What's the cost per mother reached? There are certain activities that are unique to the specific intervention, right? So for instance, a training or extension home visit or a household visit. But there are certain expenses in the third column here, the second column, those are shared costs, right? So there was a planning meeting at the beginning of the program that was shared across all the activities. There are materials being developed. There's awareness raising. These are shared program costs. And so the trick is to sort of be able to separate those out and eventually add your direct intervention costs with your shared costs so that you can get at a cost per preschool child reached, a cost per household perhaps, a cost per person reached. So we have a lot of different unit costs here. It depends on what you're interested in looking at, and they're all valid, all right? The next step then is to say, well, okay, how does this link, and this is a little hard to read, I'm sorry, how does this link to the benefits that are emerging? And again, using the same form, well, we already had lunch. You guys are not having lunch again, sorry. Using the same form, you can start to disaggregate the range of inputs, all right? So I'm not going to get into great detail on that, but it's just to indicate that we have applied this framework to 5 or 6 different multisectoral strategies, and it's holding, all right? And from this, we've developed some standard activity categories, about 19 activity categories that we think can be applied to just about any multisectoral project, and then standard input activities. So you today are going to get a chance to do that, all right? And so that's going to be our exercise. But before we go into that, and again, this is all described in greater detail in the brief you got. But does anyone have any questions on what they've seen? Is this kind of intuitively making sense? Let me just check in there. Any questions? So there's a typology, there are activities, and there's inputs. And we're moving toward trying to get both cost and cost per benefits. Okay? So I think what would be useful is to probably go into the exercise now. So let me just tell you what that is. There's two ways we can do this. You have a case study in front of you. Oh, how many people were able to open a link that I sent to all of you last night or this morning? Did anybody open that? Raise your hand if you opened and opened the link. Okay. So, and can folks open up their computers now and can you access your email and download the Excel template? So maybe we take a minute for people to do that. We're here to help you access it. There's 3 of us that can go around and help you to access that. So this is the working part. So we're going to shift gears now and get our hands dirty in trying to do this. But we need you to open up and download the Excel. Now, if you can't download it, I have it on a USB stick. So if you think that's easier for you, I'm happy to do that. Okay. All right. So let me, how do I do this? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just going to pull it out of here. Oh, working. Okay, you got it. Okay. This one? Yeah. Eject that, please. I think you can do it from. Okay. All right. And then I need to open. Okay, eject it. No, just eject it. Is it that just that one? Just eject it. No, I still see it. You have to eject it. They're called ANH Academy. So look for the folder ANH Academy and then Excel. Okay. Okay, so you've had a chance to read this. Now I'm going to very quickly give you an overview of this project. And then what we're going to do is, you're in your groups already. And as long as you have a couple people at your table that can open up the Excel file. Even in your tables, I think I'd recommend in the big tables to break up in groups of 4 people each. All right, so what I'd like to do now is just go over, in fact, the Mama Sasha project with you. Would everyone agree it sounds like a pretty complex multisectoral project, right? Probably your heads are spinning and trying to figure out what is going on. So most of you, I think many of you are nutritionists, right? And so you're familiar with implementing, designing, or evaluating a program, a nutrition program. What you're less familiar with is understanding activities, costs, and inputs. So if I'm correct, this exercise is going to kind of mimic how economists work with nutritionists, right? So we generally talk to a group of people and have to figure out what exactly are you doing. And even though it seems like it's all written down there, typically it's not written down. So you have to talk to many people to find out what the activities of the project are. So this is intended to be a little bit challenging because there's a lot of detective work in figuring out the costs, the activities and costs. So the project was pretty complex. I'm just going to quickly show you that it started in 2008 and it went to 2014. It had a lot of different periods: formative research, operational research. It had a baseline survey. The project was implemented. Then it had another operational research study, and it had a cohort study to evaluate effectiveness of the project, and then an end-line. So it was a very complex project in terms of evaluation. For those of you not familiar with OFSP, it's orange flesh sweet potato. We identified and introduced 2 varieties of sweet potato. I'm not going to stay on any one slide too long. Just want to give you a good overview of the project visually. The objectives were basically to strengthen the use of behavior change communication at the health facility level, and also introduce orange flesh sweet potatoes to households through home gardening. All right, so that was an integrated agriculture health. And the way we did that was there was an ongoing USAID project for health aid, HIV/AIDS, and health in Western Kenya. We integrated this project into an existing project. That makes it incremental, right? That we're looking at incremental new activities. The activities themselves, if we start with community sensitization, where for those of you that have done programming, go into the community level, raise awareness with community leaders, with women's groups, with religious leaders, with community leaders, tell them about this new project, let them know what's expected. We then, our community volunteer health workers who lived in those communities and who already worked there, spent time identifying pregnant women and reminding them to go to the ANC health clinic. ANC, antenatal care health services were already in existence. Just a reminder to go once you know you're pregnant, and to try to go up to 4 times in the year as recommended practice. Once they went to the ANC clinic, they were then eligible to receive 2 vouchers from the nurse. And the vouchers would entitle them to get orange flesh sweet potato vine cuttings from a nearby vine multiplier farmer. That vine multiplier farmer in number 6 was typically a model farmer in the community, somebody that had a lot of land and ability to grow sweet potato vines. They were trained to give agriculture extension messages, as well as don't forget to grow this and eat this and feed it to your baby 6 months of age. There were pregnant mothers groups in the communities to reinforce both the behavior change communication and the agriculture production messages. Monthly pregnant women's groups, the same group that met every month. And then, of course, there were activities around redeeming the voucher. When the woman went to the vine multiplier farmer, he would have to take the voucher, record it, give a little guidance, and so there was that activity. There was an overall one-time training session at the beginning of the project, and there were monthly feedback meetings, right? The target population was pregnant women and their children less than 2 years of age. The case study tells you who the various implementing, the implementing agents were community health workers, volunteers, community health extension workers, they're also volunteers, vine multiplier farmers, agriculture extension agents from the Ministry of Agriculture, agriculture care nurses from Ministry of Health, district nursing offices, and provincial administration. A very complex project with a lot of different organizations. The case study tells you clearly who the research partners were and the implementing partners, and then the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Health. As I mentioned, one of the most important parts of this kind of integrated agriculture health intervention was regular meetings, regular monthly feedback meetings. Then there was twice a year network meetings that brought all the players together. There were the implementing partners meeting that happened quarterly, and there was a once a year work planning meeting. A lot of meetings had to happen to coordinate over time. In the document that you have, I don't expect you to be able to see this, and you may want to visit it during the exercise, but this is what a program impact pathway looks like. And so if you are interested in learning more about it, or you want to see an example of one, you have access to it now in your slides. And it basically tells you what the area was, the outputs, and then the various outcomes at different levels and the ultimate impact. This program impact pathway was essential for us in figuring out what to measure, right? We developed it with the community as well. As I mentioned, some of the main activities, there was regular monitoring and evaluation. We had to integrate data capture with the existing health system, and we did have to add on a couple extra forms. I'm going to skip this a bit. We had operational research. What's important for you to be thinking about, maybe as you think about the exercise, is the project reached over 5,900 women. It established 215 pregnant women clubs. There were over 20,000 attendances to the ANH clinic, and it achieved about a 60% voucher redemption rate. All right, so that each woman was given 2 vouchers at every visit, so they didn't need to use them all. So we had they didn't need to use all their vouchers, all right? So those are some of the outputs. I'm just trying to think. Okay, so that's the background you're going to get, all right? So the slides are in. If you feel like you need to see more slides, what I would recommend is form groups of 4. I think it'll be easier if you form groups of 3 or 4 to do this work together. Take a pen, start circling activities, right? Identify main activities. So what you're going to do is I'll show you what I'd like you to do. You're going to open up the Excel spreadsheet. You've opened up your worksheet. You're going to look for the Excel spreadsheet which lists activities. And I think there's some instructions there on where to go. So at this point, break into your groups. I'd nominate sort of a ringleader to read through them, and I'd start to work through the Excel template on the second worksheet. And we will all be circulating if you have questions. Does everyone feel like they have enough information to start? Do people have enough information to start? Yeah? Okay, great. I will be circulating. I'll get that up on the screen too. Oh, God, this is so frustrating. All right, let me make an announcement. So just to make one announcement, if you list an activity, let me just show you. Let's say we do training. If you put training here, you'll have a drop-down menu for the broad activity categories, all right? So you can put a detailed description, and then use the drop-down option in column B. This should be in your exercise, so it should be kind of easy. Let's say you say home visit, or behavior change, home visit, however you want to write your notes. And then what you want to do is you want to find out, you want to then give the broad activity. Okay, so what I think I'd like to do is tell you a little bit, maybe get some feedback on how you found this exercise, and then tell you that this exercise is actually how I start every single cost study associated with an economic evaluation. So it's not really make-believe. It's really what you have to do to start planning your cost study. So, so how about each table, maybe somebody share something interesting or frustrating or a question? So is that a good idea, just to get some feedback? Okay, you're shaking your head. Let's start with this table. Ha ha ha. Can so, any feedback or question? Yeah. So we're going to just share a little feedback on this, and then I'll show you how this data ultimately can be used. Okay, go ahead.
This was the first time a few of us have done this exercise, and it wasn't always obvious what categories different activities fell into and which ones were together or should be separate, so that was sometimes frustrating.
Okay,
Can I add one? So my frustration is that the private sector is involved in the program, but there's no way to account for their inputs in the spreadsheet. So apparently...
Oh, yes, okay, so thank you.
Unless we can call them beneficiaries as well.
No, we could add a column with private sector.
Yeah, thanks.
So in the future, if that happens, put in a column that says who that source of financing was. Thank you. Great observation. Yes? Sorry. This table's really got a lot of questions. Don't let them get away with that. Okay,
so
sorry.
I was wondering, is this usually something that one person does, or is this a collaboration kind of thing? Because I feel like I would do it differently from other people, and like I would maybe...
Yeah, it's a one-person thing, but you would work with the team. You, if you were the health economist or the person tasked with costing, would work, as Will said earlier, in a multidisciplinary team. You wouldn't be able to fill this out on your own. You'd have to go to the PI, to all of the implementing partners. You'd have to check it. You'd write it, then validate it.
Okay, but it's not one, like a shared document where everyone...
Not really. Yes, we often do share it, but you just decide how you want to work with your team. So yes, you would lead it, but like I said, you'd want people to review it and validate it, so you could share it however you like, but you would be responsible for it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Oh, we have a hand over there. I feel like a game show host. Yes, we have a winner.
Thank you. I mean, this was quite informative, but I just felt that, I was talking to her just a short while ago. I mean, and we are trying to do such, activity-based, getting those activity-based cost inputs. But yeah, I felt like it would be good since there are so many partners involved, like local CBOs, there is PATH, then there is CIP. So I just thought that to make it somewhat simplified, if you add one column at the very beginning, that who is the owner, I mean, for those activities, then it would make some more sense, right? And
Yeah.
some of the activities might be cross-cutting and there are different, shared by different organizations or
Yeah.
partners. But it would keep things simpler. I mean,
Great.
right now I'm just stuck after doing all those activity listings.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Great suggestion. I would encourage people, if you ever use this, to design it as you suggest. Whatever makes it easier for you to fill in, add a column. That's a great suggestion. How about this table? Did you have any thoughts or experience, any first impressions? Were you able to kind of work through it a bit?
It reminded me of when we designed, when we started doing budgets after you wrote a proposal. It just seems like maybe in research language you look at it differently, but coming from a programming perspective, this kind of a sheet would reminds me of the time when I did budgeting after writing a proposal.
Great. Well, you are thinking about line items.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it is very similar. It's a
Yeah.
great thing to draw on.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, this table here, yeah.
I'm wondering what happens to those costs that are not valued, like the cost of a community-based organization input in the program, that you don't have a value for it. How do we account for it in this?
Okay, so you saw that there's 2 columns that indicate volunteer and beneficiary. So at this stage, just so you know, this is a sort of planning document to help you understand what to cost. So in answer to your question, you indicate where there is volunteer labor or perhaps any kind of donated good or service. And once you've indicated it, that's a trigger that you'll need to go and collect information on that donated time or the donated supplies. So this is just a planning document. You'll later have to go and contact those, find a way, focus group discussion or semi-structured interviews with those individuals that are donating their time or beneficiaries that are putting in their time to measure that and then value it. Okay. This table. Great question, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we were concerned with whether we are repeating the labels. Yeah. And also how when to look at it from a micro level and then when to zoom out.
Great question. So the question, so yes, you could, you may, you can do this in many different ways, but perhaps you are repeating your activity categories, right? So there isn't just one broad label per activity. So it's quite possible that you will, in fact, say, have a bunch of different management activities or several training activities or different types of procurement or something. So that's not unusual. And then again, you don't want too much micro, right? You don't want it too detailed, but enough to capture a discrete activity. Discrete is the trick. If you can group things, group them. Okay, I think, let me show you, I think everybody had an opportunity to comment. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I had one more question.
Sure.
For example, equipment that is purchased, is there some depreciation that's accounted for?
Yes,
Or-
but so remember, this isn't a costing spreadsheet. This is a planning spreadsheet. So your cost spreadsheet, there's too much to do in this. Can't do everything. So yeah, there's a whole manner of methodologies. So what's important here is, oh, it's charging, okay, is that actually the reason why we have a column on startup and recurrent is so that later we can, I don't know what the thing is. I don't know. Oh, well, okay. So it's so later we can know what we have to depreciate. So you indicate startup, you can indicate later, what you guys didn't get to the second tab on inputs. I was going to show you that, but we can't get online right now. So, or onto the computer. So if you go to the second worksheet tab, I can see that somebody's there now. Go ahead and, for those of you that have a computer, click on the one that said inputs. So if we had more time, like all day, you could then take one activity and think about what are the inputs there and what are the costs. This would then flag that you've got some capital goods, and yes, you would include depreciation. But again, there's lots of documents that can help you with that, so this is just a framework. The other thing I'd like to ask you to do is please go to the last worksheet tab, which is called, oh, example, okay? What's it called? Yes, so please look at it. Imagine that after you have collected all the cost data, you've consulted a methods guidance document, or you've written to me, and you've actually then collected the cost data. What I want to try to demonstrate to you is by using broad input categories and broad activity categories, we can start to get a good sense of, for instance, what is the cost per input or activity? What is the share of that input or the share of that activity in delivering this kind of multisectoral strategy? So I just wanted to sort of take you through the costing side. We have limited time, can't show you how to, you can imagine that if you had 5,900 beneficiaries, if you divide this number by that, you'd get a cost per beneficiary. So there's lots of things you can do with this, but our time is limited. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of really where we're going. I want to make a pitch for, we are developing a guidance document as part of a new project that will actually provide more detail on how to do this, including depreciation, including how to allocate shared resources from nuts to bolts. So stay in touch, and maybe next year we'll be sharing some of that with you all. So Will, I think are we at 2:30? Would you like to? Okay, can I invite you up maybe to close today's session and ask for any last minute?
Yeah, just to say thank you so much for joining this Learning Lab. To make a pitch for the technical working groups part of the ANH Academy website, where this document and then the larger, sorry, blanking on the name for that larger document you're just describing. So there'll be a link out, I think, to the SEAMS project. Is that the plan? That's a follow-on project that Carol is leading to do the kind of reference case development and that would be essential for anyone who's actually doing this work in your own organization. So if in the year ahead you find yourself with an opportunity to actually implement this, that would be your go-to resource. I think you could start at the ANH Academy Technical Working Group page. There's a drop-down menu. You find economic evaluation, and that would link out to this other project called SEAMS. And SEAMS will run for another 2 years? So there'll be lots of resources from Carol and a set of collaborators working in South Asia and also in Africa. So thanks very much for joining.